Hello and welcome to India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines we're tracking for you tonight. GST collections in the festive season almost touched 5 lakh crore rupees. The mop-up from August to October rises 10% compared to last year. October auto sales numbers paint a mixed picture. Cars, two-wheelers and commercial vehicle sales impress ahead of the festive season. Tractors come under pressure. The Sensex and the Nifty end in the red after a range-bound session. The Nifty falls below 19,000. The rupee hits a record low against the dollar but continues to trade in a narrow band. Global markets on tenterhooks as investors await the US Fed decision later tonight. The CNBC Fed survey shows 100% of market participants polled are expecting a status quo. Over 50% expect rate cuts only from September next year. Israel bombs a crowded refugee camp in Gaza, killing at least 50 people. Defends the airstrike and claims it killed a Hamas commander. Meanwhile, the Egypt border opens for the first time since the war began, allowing limited evacuations from Gaza. Sun Pharma reports a steady second quarter revenue up 11%, led by strong growth in US generic sales. Hero Moto beats estimates in Q2. CEO Pawan Munjal will take a 20% pay cut. His total remuneration last year was almost 100 crore rupees. The Indian government clears the deck for select companies to directly list on the overseas stock exchanges, but doesn't clarify on the kind of companies that will be allowed. The phased rollout plan will initially see overseas listings through the International Financial Services Centre at Gandhinagar's GIFT City. The chief executives of Air India and Akasa engage in a verbal spat and exchange testy emails over poaching of pilots. Akasa's Vinay Dubey allegedly accused Air India of breaching regulations to entice its pilots. Air India CEO Wilson Campbell hits back, saying colluding to prevent pilots from changing jobs is in violation of the law. Electoral bonds provide selective anonymity, says the Supreme Court, even as the government defends the scheme to fund political parties. The Apex Court observes that there is an information hole as the bonds have removed safeguards like the limit on how much corporates can donate to political parties. As always, let's start with the day's market action. The Sensex and Nifty ending in the red today, and we saw a range-bound session today. So the Sensex lost nearly 300 points and the Nifty falling below 19,000 again, 18,989, down by about 90 points. The Nifty Bank lost 145 points and the Nifty Mid-Cap Index was down by about 100 points as well. So the markets continue to trade lower. In the currency market, the rupee is at a record low against the dollar, even as it remains on a tight leash. However, the fall is minor as the Indian currency is just 4 paise below yesterday's close. Forex traders have attributed the fall to persistent outflows from foreign funds. That is the rupee for you. Lata is standing by to explain to us where the rupee could be headed. Lata.
Yes, it is a new closing low, but nothing dramatic about it. It's a very uneventful dip. Actually, the rupee has fallen only 0.05%. Today, the Korean won fell 0.5% and the baht has fallen 0.3%. So actually, rupee is one of the better performing currencies despite this so-called all-time closing low. The reasons are what has been for the last 5-6 weeks, the dollar's strength because of the rise in US yields, as well as FIIs relentlessly selling Indian shares. But the Reserve Bank for the past 5 weeks has been countering it by offering dollars. It sold something like nearly $4 billion in the past 5 weeks. And that's why the rupee has actually been very ranged. For the last 24 days, it's moved only within a 24 paise band of 83.05 to 83.29. Extremely ranged behavior, despite the fact that there has been global turbulence. You know, US yields over the same period from September 25 to today have moved like 10% from 4.5% to 5%. Likewise, the Japanese yields have moved like 30%, from 0.75% to about 0.95%. Compared to that, and the DXY also has moved. Compared to that, the rupee is extremely ranged. Today, the fact that the RBI has allowed the rupee to go to a new closing low, albeit just by a few pice, chances are it will allow a very slow depreciation of the rupee if the dollar continue to strengthen but so much will depend on what the Fed says and does.
All right, Lata, many thanks for joining us. Moving on, the big story this evening that is moving global markets. The US Federal Reserve will announce its decision on interest rates later tonight. According to the CNBC Fed survey, all 100% of the market participants polled do expect a status quo. In fact, a majority expect the Fed to hold fire for the next 10 months. 57% of those polled expect the first rate cut to happen only by September of next year. And of course, you can catch our special coverage of the Fed decision at 11 p.m. right here on CNBC-TV18. We will bring you minute-by-minute updates from Washington to Wall Street as Jerome Powell announces the big decision. Back home in earnings, shares of Sun Pharma rose in trade today. This after the company reported a good set of numbers in the second quarter, beating street estimates across all parameters. In fact, the company's net profit rose 5%, while revenue gained more than 11% on an annual basis. And this was largely led by healthy sales from the domestic and U.S. business. And staying with earnings, Hero Motors' second quarter numbers were largely in line with street estimates. Net profit rose more than 47%, while revenues grew 4% on an annual basis. The company's chairman, Pawan Munjal, has decided to cut his fixed annual salary by 20%. Munjal's remuneration in FY23 was near 100 crore rupees. He's decided to do this on account of splitting his position as chairman and CEO. Godrej Consumer beating estimates on all fronts except for profit for the second quarter. The FMCG major's profits grew 20%, revenues up 6%. The company also announced an interim dividend of 5 rupees per share for the financial year. And auto sales numbers in October paint a mixed picture. Cars, two-wheelers and commercial vehicle sales have impressed ahead of the festive season. However, tractor sales are under pressure. Sonia is standing by now to take us through the Motown sales report card. Sonia.
Well, thanks a lot for that. You know, it was a mixed bag this time around for the auto sector, at least the numbers that have come out so far. So let me talk about the good ones first and then we'll move to the weaker ones. Maruti had a very good set of numbers this time. Total sales growth of 19.1%, coming in at 1.99 lakh units. Hero MotoCorp also had a very strong start to the festive season. They spoke about a sales growth of 26% year-on-year in the month of October, coming in at 5.74 lakh units and talking about very strong trends in the festive season. Bajaj Auto also, echoed that same view, saying that they were pleasantly surprised to see how consumer has come back to the market, especially in some of the, some of the weaker pieces like the affordable segment. So the total sales for Bajaj Auto has gone up by 19% on a year-on-year basis. Eicher Motors as well, total commercial vehicle sales was up about 24%. So that was a list of good numbers. If you move on to the slightly weaker numbers, it's the tractor sales where there was weakness. That's also because of the, erratic monsoons that we had, as well as, escorts pointing out as to how the demand trends are expected to improve. But in the month of October, because of the delayed monsoon season, it sort of on a year-on-year basis, it is not comparable. So total tractor sales down 8.9% year-on-year, M&M tractor sales down 3% year-on-year, and Tata Motors as well, the domestic sales growth was in low single digits, just a 6% growth year-on-year. So that was also on the weaker side. Back to you.
All right, Sonia, many thanks for joining us. GST collections during the festive season has seen a growth of 10%. The mop-up reported by the government from August to October is almost touching 5 lakh crore rupees. Now, during the same period last year, the collections were at 4.4 lakh crore rupees. For the month of October, the tax revenue collected at 1.7 lakh crore rupees is the second highest mop-up since the introduction of the goods and services tax in 2017. The government has collected nearly 12 lakh crore rupees through the GST so far this financial year. And speaking of GST, about 1 lakh crore rupees could be tied up in the appeals process once GST appellate tribunals become functional. Government sources say this could happen by early 2024. Timsy standing by with the details. Timsy, why is there this expectation of such a large cachet of appeals?
Well, that's right, in what might be a game changer for both the government and the industry. Sources have told CNBC-TV18 that over 1 lakh appeals involving more than 1 lakh crore is expected to hit the GST appellate tribunals once it becomes functional. Sources share that the government expects appellate tribunals to be functional by April 2024, and it is understood that both the government and the industry aim towards the fact that once these appellate tribunals come into existence, they will ease litigation burden on high courts in the country. Government has notified creation representation of GST appellate tribunals on October 27th itself, and now sources share that the industry is likely to file appeals in large numbers as soon as these appellate tribunals come into existence against several adverse GST orders. However, industry has requested the government to consider a representation which shares that the amount of pre-appeal deposit with these appellate tribunals is really high, and they feel that it is going to hurt the working capital for many firms. The pre-deposit amount has been hiked to 30%, and in cases of high value GST cases, especially under CGST, the amount has been hiked to 50 crores, and in IGST cases, it has been hiked to 100 crores. Government aims to have 32 benches of appellate tribunals, including one national bench in the first phase, and this is likely to increase in the second phase to about 62 benches across the country. So let's see how soon these appellate tribunals come into existence and how soon the litigation burden gets shifted to these tribunals.
Timsy, many thanks for joining us. The government has approved 110 requests for import licenses for laptops and computers. Now, government sources have told CNBC-TV18 that most requests submitted have been approved unless they figure in the denied entity list. The companies that received approvals include Dell India, Apple India and Lenovo India, among others. Mama's parent company Honasa Consumers IPO issue has been subscribed 70% at the end of day 2. The employee portion was subscribed more than 3 times, followed by the qualified institutional buyers portion, which was booked over 100%. Retail investors portion has been subscribed 62%. Now, 2 of India's airlines are locked in an unpleasant dispute over hiring of pilots. Akasa Air CEO Vinay Dubey dialed Air India CEO Campbell Wilson over the dispute, following which Wilson, in a letter, told Dubey that Akasa, who had previously approached and hired pilots from Air India Express, Vistara and at least 2 other local airlines. And speaking of airlines, the Enforcement Directorate has attached assets worth 500 crore rupees linked to Jet Airways and its founder Naresh Goyal. This is part of its ongoing money laundering probe into the airline. The attached properties include 17 residential flats, bungalows and commercial premises located in London, Dubai and India. Now, the government has cleared the way for Indian companies to directly list on foreign stock exchanges. Such listings will initially be allowed through the GIFT City, but ambiguity still remains on what kinds of companies will be allowed to list overseas. Shivani Bajaj joins us now. Shivani, decks cleared for the direct overseas listing, but still clarity awaited on the framework.
Well, yes, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has finally notified Section 5 of the Companies Amendment Act 2020 that facilitates the direct listing of Indian public companies on foreign stock exchanges. The amendment will be effective from 30th October 2023. Now, remember, the said amendment to the Companies Act 2013 initiated in 2020, authorizing select companies to directly issue securities on foreign stock exchanges. The important part, however, here is the definition of select companies. There is still ambiguity on what kind of companies will be allowed and who will not be allowed to use this facility. Another problem currently is that there is no clear framework for such listing. The recent notification by MCA now sets the ball rolling for the amendment to be operationalized from the end of October, and also for the government to put out clear guidelines and norms for companies that want to use this facility. Remember, CNBC-TV18 had reported on October 16th that MCA and the Department of Economic Affairs are in advanced stages of formulating the eligibility norms for such direct overseas listing for Indian firms. According to sources, the requisite minimum period of companies' operations in India can be among the criteria being mulled over by the government. The plan is to initially roll out the overseas listing through GIFT City's IFSC, followed by broader listing in the overseas markets. Experts now suggest that this move is particularly helpful for startups looking to list overseas for better valuation, subject to their eligibility for such listings.
Shivani, many thanks for joining us. Moving to the big international story, Israel has attacked Gaza's largest refugee camp, reportedly killing dozens. The Israel army claimed the attack targeted a Hamas commander. The death toll since Hamas's attack on Israel and its retaliation since has climbed to over 8,500 people in Gaza and around 1,400 in Israel. Al Jazeera has reported that an engineer in their Gaza bureau has lost 19 family members in the refugee camp strike. The Rafah border crossing into Egypt has now been opened for foreign nationals and those severely injured to cross over. A huge crowd gathered near the border in hopes to leave besieged Gaza. And trucks from Egypt also came into Gaza earlier today. Israel's army's incessant strikes on Gaza, destroying buildings, hospitals, and now refugee camps, has invited global criticism. Telecommunication and internet networks are down across Gaza. Bolivia has announced it is cutting off diplomatic ties with Israel, accusing it of crimes against humanity in Gaza. Israel has hit back, saying that they are aligning with Hamas. Other South American nations like Chile and Colombia have recalled their ambassadors to Israel. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has called on Muslim states to seize oil and food exports to Israel to bring a stop to the bombardment of Gaza.
The Secretary General condemns the killing of civilians in Gaza and is dismayed by reports that 2/3 of those who have been killed are women and children. The international humanitarian law establishes clear rules that cannot be ignored. It is not an a la carte menu and cannot be applied selectively. All parties must abide by it, including the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. With too many Israeli and Palestinian lives already lost, this escalation only increases the immense suffering of civilians.
We call upon Israel to handle with restraint. We very much plead for humanitarian pauses. We want Israel to end the killing of Palestinians on the West Bank, which is very tragic, by the settlers on the West Bank. This should stop.
Well, that is the latest in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Now, WeWork is planning to file for bankruptcy by next week. This as per a report by Wall Street Journal. The office-sharing firm will file its bankruptcy petition in New Jersey. Remember, the company clarified that bondholders had given it 7 days to negotiate with shareholders after it missed interest payments in the 2nd of October. WeWork has declined to comment on the reports, calling them speculative. Up next on India Business Hour, Chhattisgarh boasts of the lowest unemployment rate in the country. Still, jobs are a big issue for the youth of the state. What are the other important factors? We tell you when we return in this special report. And catch CNBC-TV18's news and updates on WhatsApp, Facebook, X, Threads, Instagram, and JioCinema. While it is day 2 of the hearing on a batch of petitions challenging the electoral bond scheme, the Supreme Court observed that electoral bonds provide selective anonymity. The Solicitor General, who is representing the government in the case, argued that electoral bonds are neither anonymous or opaque, but confidential by design. Ashmit standing by now to take us through the key observations from the 5-judge Constitution bench. Ashmit, take us through what transpired in the hearings today and the key observations that came in from the bench.
Well, it was day 2 of the arguments, and we had some interesting observations falling from the apex court. Firstly, the Supreme Court observed that this appears to be, electoral bonds appears to be a case of selective confidentiality. The reason being, the Supreme Court observed that the SPI has all the details, that the law enforcement agencies can procure all these details if required, and therefore, to be frank, the Supreme Court observed that the ruling party does enjoy the advantage of having access to information about donors and the recipients of those donations, number one. Number two, the Supreme Court observed that given the fact that names of large donors, if they choose to buy electoral bonds, will feature in the books of accounts of SBI, to avoid that, the concern that the Supreme Court observed is that large donors could very easily ask other persons who have KYC to buy these electoral bonds in smaller denominations and then eventually buy it from them. So that's another concern that has been red flagged by the apex court. Thirdly, the Supreme Court noted that at no point is the court suggesting that if the electoral bond scheme is struck down, then we need to travel back to the older regime. The Supreme Court said there's nothing preventing the government from coming out with a more transparent, a more efficient regime in question. And finally, the Supreme Court observed that even speaking of the older regime, there were safeguards in place. There were caps in terms of corporate donations as a percentage of the net profits. There were disclosures that these corporates were required to make in terms of donations being made to respective parties. No such caveats, no such disclosures required under this new regime. The arguments, we understand, will continue tomorrow. Solicitor General Tushar Mehta will continue his submissions.
All right, Ashmit, we will of course tune in for day 3. But staying with news coming in from the Supreme Court, Udit Sood, one of the petitioners seeking legal sanctity for same-sex marriages in India, has filed a review petition challenging the Supreme Court's October 17 judgment. The court had refused to grant legal recognition to queer marriages in India, instead passing the onus of legislation to Parliament. However, it did ask the centre to address practical concerns faced by same-sex couples like getting ration cards, pension, gratuity, etc. Now, Chhattisgarh has over 18 lakh first-time voters this time. The state is going to the polls on the 7th and the 17th of November and boasts of the lowest unemployment rate in the country. Still, jobs are a big issue for the youth of the state. What are the other important factors for the young people while casting their votes? Santya Gora reports.
As per CMIE, Centre for Monitoring Indian Economy, in March 2023, Chhattisgarh had the lowest unemployment rate in the country. The state's unemployment rate was 0.77% against the national average of 7.8% in March 2023. One would think this indicates that unemployment is not a big election issue in the state, but the youth begs to differ.
I think job opportunities तो एक बहुत बड़ा problem रहेगा ही because youth को promote करना उसके लिए job opportunities निकालना ये सब consistently नहीं होता है. I think बीच-बीच में gaps हो ही जाते हैं.
जैसे students के लिए education facilities और उसका फिर मैम jobs क्या ये सब के मैम facility देना चाहिए तो हम ऐसे मतलब parties को हम vote दें.
सभी चाहते हैं कि middle class अपना एक income of source बना सके ताकि 2 वक्त की रोटी मिल जाए आराम से.
To impress these young voters, Congress government announced a 2,500 rupee per month unemployment allowance 7 months before the assembly elections. But allegations of corruption in Public Service Commission and relatives of bureaucrats and politicians being selected illegally has hampered Bhupesh Baghel government's plans to impress the young voters.
PSC वाला जो स्कैम हो उसमें 18 युवाओं या युवाई को उन्होंने सीट दिलाकर उनके रिलेटिव्स को आगे बढ़ाया है और ना कि जो मेहनत करके आगे बढ़ रहे हैं उनको ना ही पीछे छोड़ा है. तो ये सबसे बड़ा मुद्दा रहा है.
Congress government claims that it has delivered on education front and this will be noticed by the voters.
शिक्षा की तरफ हम लोग विशेष ध्यान दें जिसमें स्वामी आत्मानंद अंग्रेजी स्कूल 750 से ऊपर हम लोगों ने खोले जो निःशुल्क पढ़ाई होती है.
But these young voters think that the government is far from providing quality affordable education.
बेसिकली ज़्यादा अच्छी कॉलेज सिर्फ रायपुर में है. रायपुर में अवेलेबल होती हैं. अब बहुत सारे जो स्टूडेंट हैं वो दूर दूर में रहती हैं. अब उनको ट्रैवल आने जाने में दिक्कत होती है. उस हिसाब से रहता है. जैसे बेसिकली मेरा कहना ये है कि ट्रांसपोर्टेशन में स्टूडेंट्स के लिए मे बी जो ज़्यादा दूर रहता है उनके ट्रांसपोर्टेशन गवर्नमेंट थोड़ी लेस करे. मे बी कुछ रूल्स निकाले जिससे कुछ कार्ड वार्ड कुछ हो जैसे कि पॉलिसीज बनाए जिससे डेवलपमेंट हो स्टूडेंट्स का आना ज़्यादा हो ताकि मतलब आगे और जाके पढ़ाई कर सकें.
But there are other issues apart from education as well.
काफ़ी सारी पार्टीज वोट्स पहले मतलब जब वोटिंग टाइम आता है तब बोलते हैं कि हम ये करेंगे वो करेंगे बट होता है वैसे कुछ नहीं है.
वादे जरूर होते हैं लेकिन वो पूरे नहीं होते.
रायपुर में भी अभी बहुत सारे केसेस हुए. रेप केसेस चल रहे हैं. अभी पिछले महीने भी हुआ था. अभी रायपुर बिल्कुल भी सेफ नहीं है.
Women safety issue or not?
I think it's an issue. Improvement की ज़रूरत है.
The young people, the first-time voters, feel that accountability is an important issue, and what promises are made to the people before the elections are hardly fulfilled by their leaders, and that's going to play a key role while they will decide who to cast their vote to. And apart from that, unemployment, better job opportunities, affordable education, facilities to avail that education and women's safety are going to be other important issues which these young voters will keep in their minds while casting their votes on 7th and 17th of November and to decide the fate of 90 assembly constituencies of Chhattisgarh. In Chhattisgarh, with camera person Swapnil Bandekar, this is Santya for CNBC-TV18.
Well, luxury shopping in India has now taken a new destination. The Jio World Plaza, India's largest luxury shopping mall, opened its doors today. The mall will house flagship stores of marquee brands like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Cartier, Dior, Bulgari, among others. Rachna gets a sneak peek. Take a look.
this evening is a very special evening for both Nita and me as parents, and it is our time today to applaud the work that Isha has done as a leader in Reliance Retail.
Today is actually an ode to all the Indian designers and our arts and artisans also.
What you're seeing behind me is India's largest luxury shopping mall, which is now open to public. Built by Reliance Industries, it is situated in Mumbai's Bandra Kurla complex. Reliance Retail's Isha Ambani is the brains behind this expansive retail complex that spans over 4 levels and is built over a total area of 750,000 square feet. What sets this mall apart is its upscale retail experience. This mall houses 66 luxury brands. For brands like Valentino, YSL, Tory Burch, it's their first ever store in Mumbai. And for brands like Balenciaga and Giorgio Armani, it's in fact the India debut. Adding to this is food and entertainment. This mall also houses a multiplex and a gourmet food court. Finishing off luxury experiences at the World Plaza are services like VIP concierge, personal shopping assistance, taxi on call, and even a butler. The Jio World Plaza adds to the very few luxury shopping destinations that are available in India, taking on the likes of DLF Emporio in Delhi. This comes at a time when India's luxury retail segment is evolving significantly. In fact, the ultra-high net worth individuals are estimated to grow by 58.4% in the next 5 years. In Mumbai, I'm Rachna Thandrajani.
With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned. The news continues right here on CNBC-TV18. And remember to tune into our coverage of the Fed's decision later tonight, starting 11 p.m.